I hope that this conversation we'll have will really provide you with a perspective, if anything, about what you can do and how you can begin to think about planning your lives, thinking ahead for the next 3, 4, 5, 10 years as well. And we need to think that far to get beyond those immediate emotional, immediate instant gratification sort of things that we're doing now, to think about how we're really going to change the community. So one thing I would really like to start with, and this puts it into perspective a lot, especially for me, it was actually a chart by a non-Muslim academic, but it reminded me of the Hadith of Prophet ﷺ in Tirmidhi, where the Prophet ﷺ said, أَعْمَارُ أُمَّتِي مَا بَيْنَ سِتِّينَ وَسَبْعِينَ the age of my ummah is somewhere between 60 and 70. وَقُلُّهُمْ مَا يَجُوزُ ذَلِكَ. And a little of them exceed that, right? And it is a very interesting way to think about your life. And it is like Prophet ﷺ's life as well, where he had a life of just above 60, okay? And if you studied his life, his seerah in general, and I actually gave a khutbah about this recently. If you just look at the first 25 years of the Prophet ﷺ's life, you can see his life was also in stages as well. And I like to show this to people I speak to because it puts it into perspective for you, okay? You have your youth, you have your school, and now you're at uni, right? In between 20 and 30s, you're thinking about jobs, the next step. You're thinking about, maybe marriage after uni. And then when you get older, you're thinking about, okay, I need to think about my financial stability now. How am I going to look after my family? What am I going to do for my children? And then before you know it, you're 45, 50, 60 years old. What do? Right? You have various options there. Some people, they just retire, they don't want to do any work. Some people lie on the bed and just look into Jannah and go, alhamdulillah, I had a good life. What am I doing with my life? And I want to share just a story quickly about myself. So I hope it provides a bit more perspective, the human side of things. So like myself, right, I went to UNSW, I came to here. I studied a Bachelor of Commerce because I wanted to make a lot of money, as you do, And then, after that, I worked in the corporate world, but because I studied a lot of Islamic studies at that time, right? We had an Arabic class every weekend when I was sort of just out of uni. We went for 5 hours. On Saturday, we'll go to Liverpool, we'll study from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. We'll study Arabic. I was with my friends. It was amazing, right? So that went on for a few years, but then it made me start to question, well, what am I doing for my work? I was working at Optus and Telstra at that time. I was doing, for me anyway, what I felt was long hours, but really it's not. 9-to-5 job isn't really long hours, but so I was starting to question, well, what's my goals? What do I do next, right? And I say to people a lot that if you're just working in a job when you finish uni, it can be quite, and you don't have that direction, it can become quite soul-destroying. It eats you up because you're working there, you're working hard, you're thinking, what am I doing, subhanAllah? Where am I going with this? I'm working hard, and then you go home, you make your money, you see your paycheck. Maybe I want to go to lessons here and there, but what is the long-term direction, right? So I sort of fumbled around that until I finally, I was working at eBay at that time, getting paid well, traveling the world. And then I go, khalas, I want to study Arabic even more because, obviously studying Arabic in Sydney, it's very difficult. You're coming out here, you're speaking English and so forth. So I go, khalas, I'm going to quit my job. I quit my job, and then I went to work in Saudi, lived with the mashayikh there, studied Arabic, and I was still working part-time. I had a full-time job, but in Saudi, you're working part-time in a full-time job, because everyone's so chilled out. Everyone wakes up at 9 o'clock. It's like, you want to shave, you drink tea. Asr, 3 o'clock, everyone's done. They pray Asr and they go home. It's meant to be a full-time job, and you don't do much work. But even that, I found that I wasn't maximizing my Arabic. So I quit that, and then I went over to Morocco with my wife, and we studied Arabic full-time, alhamdulillah. So it was really beautiful time. And it was made more beautiful because we were there during Ramadan, and as Ramadan progressed and progressed and progressed, subhanAllah, you understood more and more of the Quran until by the end of it, you're understanding everything that came out. It was very interesting. So after all that, so still, I'm narrating all this because I want to give you a perspective of, I still didn't really know, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. So after the Arabic years, I came back, I got this job at Apple, and then I decided to do my master's, mashallah, at this amazing uni again. So I studied my MBA here, right? And then after that, I was like, the kids came. So I could no longer work those intense full-time hours. So I quit my job. And that's when I started devoting myself to shariah. That's when throughout that period of 2011 to 2020, I studied the bachelor's in shariah, the master's in shariah, and during that time I got that job in ICFAL as well. Because by that time by the time I was 30, subhanAllah, I felt like I had a good grasp of where I'm headed, where I'm planning to do. And then it wasn't until when I was in ICFAL, then I actually appreciated, hold on, finance and money is actually very important to the life of a Muslim. Why are we constantly preaching this thing about, just forget about wealth, forget about wealth, stay in the masjid, concentrate on the deen, study the deen. But when I was actually there and I'm seeing the community, I'm working with the community, dealing with people's money, seeing their hardships, seeing their trials that come from money, I realized, subhanAllah, if you take a step back, Islam actually provides the complete system of how you should live your life, but at each and every stage of your life, and in all aspects of the Sharia, there are elements of finance in there. And if you take a step back and truly analyze each part of your life, you'll see that every part, whether it's in acts of worship, whether it's acts of dealing with one another, money and finance is very interrelated. And I'm going to tackle that in a bit. All right, so that's where I am now. I'm at this stage 30 to 45. I think I have it sorted out. I got the kids, I got the family and so forth. And now at this stage, I feel, okay, I think, I've associated myself with Tablighi groups, Hizb Tahrir, all these different groups, etc., etc., etc. So I had that broad community experience. I know what everything was about. And then now I'm kind of feeling, okay, I think I know where I want to be, right? But what I want to do for you today, and it's about you, is that I want you to start thinking about all those things now, early. I was saying to Hasib the other day, the times when you're not actually caring about money or your direction in life, it's actually the time when you actually should be caring about money and your direction in life. When you're not thinking about these things, that's the time to actually think about it. When you're actually at this age, you're young, you're here, right, to actually think about where you want to be. And it doesn't need to be exactly in a A to Z plan. Just a general direction would really help you as you progress. And now I'm going to that point here. This is how integrated finance is in our deen, in our sharia. If you think about the definition of the sharia, it's defined as some scholars is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has legislated for his slaves from acts of worship, from the akhlaq, from mu'amalat, from their manners, from their transactional dealings, and all aspects of their lives. In every single aspect of your life, there is a legislation for that, and that's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed for you for the benefit of you in this life and the next. That's a very comprehensive definition of the Sharia. And the reason why I have this is because normally when we're speaking about Islamic finance, and hopefully this will lead to many other topics, but when we speak about Islamic finance, you'll hear really sort of the catchphrases of that time, right? Oh, Bitcoin, shares, house finance. And these are the really high level questions that are dealt with after understanding all the fundamentals of the Sharia, all the principles and so forth. Then you can start discussing these questions. So to start up here and have conversations up here without knowing the rest is actually, you're missing a lot of pieces of information. But if we looked at the Sharia, right, when we're looking at inheritance, politics, orphans, punishment and compensating people for physical harm, zakat, Ramadan, there's even zakat al-fitr in Ramadan. So you can see how many aspects of Islam, there's wealth and money involved. And that's really important. That's really important to appreciate. We can't simply just forget about money because it's part of our deen. It's part of who we are. And you're going to need money if you want to live. And you need all these other basics of understanding money. So riba, buying and selling, rent, all these things just to understand contemporary financial issues. So I'm just trying to frame the context of how complex it could be. And myself, even, question, yeah.
Are you saying that to have like full awareness and understanding of like what we should do with our finances, we should like have complete knowledge of the Sharia?
No. So, so there's two things, right? So the first one is in order for us to have a full understanding of what to do with our finances, you don't need to have a full comprehension of the Sharia, because I was about to say before you put up your hand that I've been studying this for 10 years plus. I've been liaising with top-notch scholars, going back and forth. I've looked at research articles. I work in the field, and I can tell you, bro, it's super hard, subhanAllah. It's super hard, right? So one of the things I normally say is there's no problem. You can follow a scholar. Right? There's no problem if you choose a sheikh that you trust, you can follow him. But the reason why I say all that is because I want you to appreciate that when you hear about these different Islamic financial products and what the Sheikh said and so forth, it's not as easy and simple as you think for their arrival to that opinion. Right? Because even me, like if you ask me a very simple, it might be a simple question, is buying Apple shares in the US halal, right? You might think that's an easy question. It would be like, I'll say to you, well, and I have these conversations, I see a lot. It depends, Like, and you'll probably find that when you're studying with your professors at uni, right? Like, someone in the crowd might ask a question, and then the professor will go, yeah, and that comes with, and you'll truly appreciate that as you study more and more of the deen. Like, some of these questions are very high level, so don't be afraid to take fatwa as a general thing, but you don't need to understand all these things to have general concepts about financial Islamic dealings in your life and how you plan your Islamic life and life in general. That's the key point. So very quickly, so I only have a few slides. I want to show you, look, it's only a few slides and then we're going to sit and have a chat. But I want to set wealth in context, right? Because we often hear this narrative that we should leave wealth, don't worry about wealth, concentrate on deen and Islam. But I don't feel it's a healthy thing, because you're going to be doing this. I was in the same stage for the next few years. You're going to feel depressed in your job. I'm making, mashallah, because you're highly qualified, you're all very smart. You're going to be earning, inshallah, high money. And then you start feeling guilty. What am I doing for my wealth? What am I doing with this? What am I doing with that? There's so many people suffering around the world. I'm earning this money. I can't speak Arabic. I want to understand the Quran. So you come with all these sort of contradictions in your mind, right? But I want to set the record straight that Sulaiman alayhi salam, as a prophet of Islam, what did he say? قَالَ رَبِّي اغْفِرْ لي. He said, oh Allah, forgive me, obviously, number one. وَحَبْ لِي مُلْكًا لَا يَنْبَغِي لِأَحَدٍ مِّن بَعْدِي. He said, give me a kingdom, and you can read it up there, so large that no one will have after me. Is this shaitan asking that question? It's not shaitan asking the question. It is a prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala making this dua. And then again, we hear this dua all the time. رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيَا حَسَنَةً وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ حَسَنَةً وَقِنَا عَذَابَ النَّارِ. Right. We're told to ask, Allah, give us the best in this life and give us the best in the next. What are you asking for? The best. The hasana fi dunya is, the scholars define as every single goodness that you can have in life. Hasanat does not just mean spirituality. You're praying on the masjid on time. Yes, that's hasana. You are fasting, alhamdulillah. Yes, that's hasana. But complete, whether it's in your relationships, whether it's in your careers, whether it's with your family, whether it's with wealth, whether all this complete aspect of your Islam, shariah that we defined, that is the hasana fi dunya. And you can ask for that, subhanallah. So if there's haram things that we should turn away from, why are we taught as Muslims it's fine to ask for? And then you might go, aha, but I got you here. Bro, I got you here. These things are a fitnah, this wealth. And you're going to quote me this hadith probably. You're going to Google, let's talk about it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, إِنَّمَا الْأَمْوَالَكُمْ وَأَوْلَادَكُمْ fitnah. Oh, you're contradicting yourself now. Your wealth and your children is a fitnah, it's a test. وَاللَّهُ عِنْدَهُ أَجْرٌ عَظِيمٌ. With Allah is the great reward, you're going to say to me. And I go, yes. But again, let's take a step back. The definition of fitnah is like a trial, it's a test. I know we hate our exams, we hate them because we don't like to stress out. But when you do a test, there's a few scenarios that can occur. What are they? Like, well, one is you're gonna fail and you got to repeat your term. You got like 30. Khalas, you're done. Repeat. I don't know. Do they have like, you can beg for like
Yeah, you can fail.
Yeah, receipt. You can fail and beg for a receipt, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
you can beg for a receipt and all that kind of stuff. Or on the opposite end of the spectrum, you can get the university medal, right? You can get 99, and what does that mean? Does that mean you failed your fitnah? You failed your trial? You failed your tribulation? You failed your exam? No, you succeeded dramatically, right? So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying these things are a fitnah, these things are a trial, these things are, if you look at what the scholars say, the wisdom for this fitnah, for trials, isn't just to make you cry and make you upset, it's to extract this beautiful thing that you have in you, extract the sabr out of you, extract the closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that you should be coming closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's so many benefits to fitnah and trials in regards to your, I have a friend, subhanAllah, he had a son, his son died, right? He wasn't religious before then, he was getting riba, bank loans, his son passed away, and through that, instead of turning away from the deen, he turned closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And subhanAllah, now he's got like 4 kids, he's really happy. He said, alhamdulillah, like he was sad his son died, but he saw the wisdom in that trial, right? That trial made him a better Muslim, a better father, a better friend, subhanAllah. So wealth is not a problem. You can ask, but how you deal with that trial can determine whether you're going to exceed dramatically, because you can have a lot of money and exceed dramatically, and we're going to come to this. I'm going to give you an example. Or you can fail, subhanAllah, very, 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 very miserably. And we hear the hadith also, just to close off this point, this wealth in context. الدنيا ملعونة وما فيها. Right? The dunya is mal'una, is cursed. وما فيها. And everything in it, إلا what? Except what? Dhikrullah, except the remembrance of Allah, and ma walahu, and whatever follows it, wa aliman, and the alim, the learned person, the scholar, aw muta'allim, the person that's studying. And you think about this, I got this brother again, He's talking about this, there's another contradiction. This dunya is cursed, everything, except what? The remembrance of Allah, and whatever followed it. But again, right, I always say to brothers, you can think at a really high level, or you can dig deeper. You can go to level 2, level 3, level 4, right, and go deeper and deeper and truly understand. So if we truly understand this hadith is saying, okay, everything in the dunya is cursed except what? The remembrance of Allah. Okay. Does the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only mean, I'm gonna like sit here, okay, subhanallah, 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 subhanallah. Is that the only definition of dhikrullah, remembrance of Allah? It's not. It's not, right? What are the other ways you remember Allah? You can be traveling in a plane, flying off to, mashallah, some beautiful tropical island in Malaysia, and you can spit in the plane saying, subhanallah, subhanallah, subhanallah. You're so happy, right? You can be married to a beautiful spouse, right? Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. You can have a lot of money and you say what? Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. So when you have things in the dunya that make you remember Allah, what does that become? That becomes this. You move it from here to this remembrance of Allah. You move things that are cursed to things that remind you of the remembrance of Allah. And that's why if you look at the books of hadith, one of the first hadith that we all often read is إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, right? Your actions are by intentions. Because when you actually get your intention right and you make that razor sharp, that's like your weapon to make things that could potentially be taking you away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to what? To bringing you towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when you're in that boat, subhanallah, you have a very happy life. You can be very wealthy and happy. You can have lots of children that are supposed to be a test and you're very happy. You can have all these things in the dunya like Sulaiman alayhi salam and still give da'wah and be very happy. So, so I want to put that in context, and I hope that that stays with you for the next many years of your life. Go, bro.
What if someone comes and says, I got you, Sheikh, again? That I've heard this
They don't really say that. Go, I got you, bro.
They come with this rhetoric that I don't know which companion said it, or maybe it's the Tabi'in. He said that, live in this world like a traveler. And then they say that, okay, based on that statement, you should only aim for the minimum. So okay, you get a job or you earn enough money to do the basics to take care of yourselves. And then they speak through that mentality, and it kind of creates this mindset where you should only be satisfied with the minimum,
Yep.
and you shouldn't aim to excel in terms
Excellent.
of wealth or in anything, like in terms of this dunya, you shouldn't excel
Excellent.
in terms of this. How would you respond to that?
That's beautiful, because that's why the Sharia is, that's an example of taking certain things in the Sharia to prove your point. And that's fine. Look, if you have a certain point to prove, then this, subhanAllah, the Sharia is so vast, you can prove many things with Quran and Hadith, right? The deen of Islam is one of balance, right? So that is one end where it's a legitimate hadith, right? It reminds you to live in this dunya as if you're a traveler, to live simply and so forth, right? But it's balanced by also, so I find that the community also moves in one extreme, right? They'll use that and they go, look, live in this world as if you're a traveler and so forth, but donate $1 million to the masjid, please. Donate $1 million for this cause. Help your brothers and sisters in Gaza. Do that. Okay, if we all lived as travelers, we all lived by minimal means, how do we change and make changes for the Ummah? Right? So that's Sahih Hadith. It's a legitimate Hadith, but you also find in the character and the communication methods of the Prophet ﷺ, he'll communicate to people differently in regards to their context. Right? And that's really important when you're thinking about this. Like, perhaps, yes, you might need to say to someone that's super rich, who's a multi-billionaire, brother, just be in this dunya as if you're a traveler. And he's like, oh, okay, that's right, yeah, I should start giving in Palestine, I should do this, right? But then you also have the other situation where, okay, a brother, all he wants is study, he survives on Centrelink, he survives on donations, he's living this world as a traveler. So it's the context and the balance, right? My aim here is I want to provide the balance, because I also often feel that it's too much towards one way. Yeah. Does that? Yeah. Okay. And just quickly, I've got 2 more slides, inshallah. I'll be very quick. So when you think about wealth and how wealth fits into all this is what we just spoke about from that question, right? We built upon, okay, if you want to help society, if you want to help people, you can help people either with your time, your own time, or you can help people with your money, generally speaking, right? And often we are taught while we're growing up that go to uni, get a good job so you can buy a house. That's the extent of our financial literacy, our financial education. And maybe a few hadith about here, that innamal amwalakum wa auladukum, fitnah is wealth and all these kind of hadith, right? But when you really think about it, we're really only taught one level of the whole equation. So when you actually think about how to build your wealth, how to build your assets, and this is, you don't need to, so this is a mindset. I'm not saying that we all need to be super rich. We all need, all need money and so forth, because every one of us has different priorities, different roles in society. You don't need to be super rich to help. You can benefit people using your time, right? But I'm just saying, look, here are the concepts you need to really think about as you're going through life, because you don't want to be 30 or 40 thinking, oh man, I don't have nowhere to live. Cost of living is so expensive, rents are so expensive and so forth, when you actually had all this opportunity up until you have a family and kids and all this stuff to really think about these things. The first step is you have your income, right? And your income is everything related to you trying to generate money for yourself. And then your next level is, okay, well, after you have your income, how am I spending my money? There's so many things you can spend your money on with iPhones, iWatches, all this kind of stuff. Perhaps in uni it's probably about cafes and food and whatever. And then what you have left is your net profits. But it doesn't end there. So you have your income, you have your expenses, you have your net profit, and maybe look, in accounting, you study these things, but you don't really think about it in this way, right? You have your net profit, and this money that you have left, this is your investable wealth. So this is money that you actually have in your hands. You can actually use it for something of benefit, whether you want to give extra donations, whether you want to, whatever you want to do, right? And then you have certain liabilities that you have, like the electricity bills and all these kind of bills. So after all these things, You have this, your net wealth at the top, right? That's the money you actually have in your bank account for you to then progress with your lives, to plan your life, okay? So you really need to think about it from that perspective where, okay, where am I earning my income? How am I going to earn my income? Do I need to take an extra job? Do I need to take less jobs, right? All this is about your income, right? Do I need to buy a really, really expensive car? Do I need to buy a cheaper car? So all this is in your expenses. When you think about your wealth in this way and how then you conduct your life, then you're starting to get a better idea of, okay, this is my potential financial plan for the next 10 years, and this is how I need to think about my wealth, okay? And I want to leave you this one hadith before we get into, inshallah, what I hope will be quite an interactive discussion. Sahih hadith, Bukhari, in the book of inheritance. Right? When you read the books of hadith, the hadith, and you can all probably reading it right there now, but I want to provide some context. The books of hadith, they don't have chapters of how to make $1 million. You know, like you see on the Instagram stuff, I'll teach you to make $1 million. You do this. They don't have that, right? They have, it's very plain vanilla. They have, okay, book of trust, book of business transactions, book of inheritance, right? And you only get these gems when you're reading through it. One really beautiful hadith that I found in Sahih Bukhari. Zubair radiallahu anh, he was one of the companions, the 10 companions that were guaranteed Jannah in this life. You know, the part of the 10 given glad tidings of Jannah in this life, Zubair. So the hadith goes like this, and you're probably reading out, but I'm going to read it again for emphasis. So he left no money, but he has certain lands. One of them in Aghaba, 11 houses in Medina, 2 in Basra, 1 in Kufa, 1 in Egypt. Subhanallah. He had assets. Allahu Akbar. He had lots of assets. But what he would do was that there's an interesting chapter in Islamic law where if someone comes to you and say, look, can you keep this on trust for me? Then Hasib needs to actually keep it in its form as much as he can. He can't use it. He can't sell it. He can't transact it. He just needs to keep it with him for however long until I come back and I say, Hasib, I can take it back now, right? So he has to keep it safe, and there's laws and regulations for that. Zubair, being the pious person he was, he didn't like that responsibility. So he will say, no, just don't give me money. When you want to give this, just give it to me as a debt. And when it's a debt, it changes. So debt basically means I, lent Hasib there 200 grams of gold, for example, right, which is what they dealt with back then. If you take it as a debt, there's a lot more leeway in how he can take that money and use it however he wants. But when I come back and ask for my money, he just needs to give me 200. He doesn't need to give me that exact same product. So if I gave him this gold, if this was gold, a gold microphone, and I say, keep this in trust for me, he has to keep this exact thing in trust. He can't use it. But if I say, oh, look, I'll give this to you as a debt, this golden thing as a debt, he can then sell it and whatever. He just needs to come back and give me that amount of gold, that in worth, right? So Zubair radiallahu anhu, he didn't used to keep trust, but he would just say, look, just lend me that money. So that's what he used to do. He would just take money and we invest it and so forth. And by the end of his life, it's Sahih Hadith. It's in the Hadith itself. You can read it. Look for Zubair, look for these key words. I can share this, etc. It is said that when he died, his wealth, his total property wealth amounted to 50,200,000 dinar, right? Which equates to this, 18.6 billion in today's worth, right? He had that much in gold, in assets, that he was a multi-billionaire. Subhanallah. What did he do? He just lived life. He had assets here and there. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decided to bless him. Was he a pious man? Yes, he was a pious man. Was he very religious? Of course he was very religious, right? Did he participate in jihad and all these kind of things? Yes, of course. But he also invested and he also thought about his money. He didn't spend his whole life thinking about, he didn't spend 24 hours a day thinking about money. He spent, he didn't like it, 5 minutes. Don't give me that, just give it to me as a debt. Oh, okay, I'm going to take this money and I'm going to just put it into this asset, whatever time it takes him. He wasn't obsessed about it. He didn't focus his whole life about it, but by simply devoting a little bit of his life to it, he was able to maximize his financial benefits, and it was also to to benefit his children and all the people that inherited from him as well, right? So I really wanted to put all that in context. So that's all I wanted to say as a general talk, but I believe that maybe that would have generated some questions or some insights that we can speak about, or it can be about your careers in life. So also besides the 20 years, you know, I'm married. I have 3 kids. I got married to my wife when she was in uni. She was still studying postgraduate medicine as well. So I also saw her in her journey, how she progressed from studying med at Sydney Uni, because apparently Sydney has a better medical school. No, just kidding. No, so at Sydney Uni, she did that, and then I saw her I saw her journey as she went through her career as well, and how I stayed home. I was a stay-at-home dad at certain times as well to support that. So I bring that sort of perspective. It's a very different perspective, and I hope that, you know, perhaps I'm happy to share that as well in our discussions. But at the end of the day, it's more about you, and I hope that to you know, answer any of these questions that you may have throughout this session, inshallah. And we'll keep it flowing. I mean, they don't need to force it.
We'll keep it as a discussion.
Bismillah.
So it would just be pretend it's like a tutorial, and everyone just like raises their hands, you know, just have a discussion.
Bismillah.
So what we're going to do is that, so me and Brother Yusuf, we're just going to, Sheikh Yusuf and me, we're just going to talk about this general stuff. And if you guys have any questions, or if you guys have any like career questions, it doesn't have to be just Islamic finance, right? It could be like related to your personal situation, okay? Then feel free to ask, inshallah. Does anyone have any questions on the side there? Sheikh Yusuf?
You know how you said the thing about like investing in stocks, and like how you had a discussion with him about the ins and outs of it. Can you like go into it a little bit, because I'm curious about it.
Yeah, I can. So look, in regards to can everyone hear? Do I need the mic or sisters? Okay. Yeah, okay. Look, in regards to investing in stock, generally the Mashaykh have said this model of investing to have a share of a company is halal, like at a general principle. Okay, the interesting sort of Islamic legal implications come in regards to investing in different types of companies, because you have companies that are 100% halal, all they do is halal things, mashallah, because if any one of you, inshallah, started a company in the future, you're going to do everything halal, inshallah. And then you have companies that are mixed meaning mixed halal, mixed haram. For example, Apple, right? Apple, it's a halal company in general. They sell iPhones, iPads, etc. But they'll have, you know, one of the largest war chests of cash in the bank that's generating hundreds and millions of dollars in interest. It's a small percentage, but if you really think about it, so many people can live off that money, right? So that's called a mixed company. And then you have companies that are totally haram, you know, which we know, like alcohol companies, all that kind of stuff that you hear about a lot, you know, superannuation, Islamic superannuation companies or funds, Islamic funds, they'll tell you that these are haram because they have our certain filters, you know, pork, tobacco, etc., right? So many of these companies, they fall into this mixed category, and that's when you scratch under the surface from level 1, you go level 2 and level 3 now. Well, that's where the scholars have a difference of opinion. And I'll give you this breadth of opinion, not to confuse you, but to make sure, to give you perspective. Because I think when you discuss the difference of opinion, I think we're all mature adults. We understand difference of opinion. We understand there's different academic ways to approach issues. Yeah, in uni, you do this all the time, but likewise in Islamic studies, right? So some scholars will say, look, if a company has any sort of haram in it, like Apple, because they have their hundreds of millions of dollars in interest, poof, they're going to give it the X. Okay, that's haram. But then you have other scholars that say, no, look, given the situation we're in as the Muslims, you know, if we want to invest around the world, there's not many options available. They come from the perspective of the benefit of the Muslims, saying, look, well, where else are the Muslims going to invest their money and so forth? You know, and you can debate as much as you want, but that's their reasoning, right? They want to have some kind of investable, they call it universe, investable area that they want to invest in. And they'll say, look, okay, you can invest in shares like Apple if their objectives are not haram, if they don't earn more than 5% of their total income from haram. So then they'll start having these filters that you filter for, and they'll say, okay, investing in an Apple share becomes halal. Like you can, according to their fatwa, right? But yes, there are other bodies of scholars that will say, and I would imagine maybe it's might be opinion of many people at university where, you know, those go, look, if it's haram, right? But, you know, it's interesting, as you get older, one, your perspective changes, but your appreciation of the challenges in living in a non-Muslim society and a non-Muslim sort of dominated world changes as well. And then you can appreciate, okay, look, I can see why this sheikh or these scholars or this particular organization has allowed for investing in shares like Apple, BHP and all that kind of stuff, right? But when you're looking at Islamic, that's essentially what they do. They'll have a program, they'll filter out, they'll go, all these are haram, based on these filters, this is your list that you can pick from, and then you can pick from that list what shares you want to invest. That's what the Islamic super funds do. Yeah.
So when it comes to like income,
is there a sister's hand?
oh, sisters, anyone have a question?
Oh, it was just a bit related to that, but you can ask your question first.
Oh no, you ask a question.
Okay.
Don't worry.
I was just wondering, in terms of that, knowing which stocks are halal and whatnot, two brothers opened a great website called Baruch a while ago, but they also closed it down recently. Do you recommend any pages or anything
Yep.
to get that information?
Yeah, so the ones I know of, so it's normally a paid service. It's normally a paid service. So there are a few out there, you know, I can't remember the name. So there's Ideal. I can provide a list to Hasib, but there's Ideal Ratings. There's many out there because it's not. The actual filters are very simple. There's only about 6 or 7, right? So if you put these in an algorithm and you can do some minimal programming, you can sort of extract all this stuff, and they'll show you here's the investable universe. But one key point I want to raise about these filters is that these are, and I think it's often forgotten, that these are minimal criteria. So the filter is here, right? Anything outside of this boundary, it becomes haram. Anything inside this boundary, it becomes halal, right? So just because the boundary is here, it's like we're living in most of our Islamic lives. It doesn't mean you're going to always live at the edge, because that's risky. You know, any kind of volatility, khalas, you're gonna fall into haram. So be aware that these are basic minimal criteria, and it's better to be sort of better than those filters and criteria. But I'll provide a list for Hasib, inshallah, about the lists. Yeah.
Yeah, inshallah. When it comes to income, obviously that we're all studying university for a degree and we're trying to get an income, right? We're trying to get money.
Yeah.
But the places that we work in, like if they do sort of like suspicious stuff, like unethical stuff, or if they, let's say in this day and age, if they're like supporting like Zionism and stuff, what's like the ruling behind that? Like, can we still work in that department or that industry?
Well, it depends on how dodgy they are.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, for example, you're working in an organization and they go, all right, our sole objective is we're going to cheat, we're going to lie, we're going to, you know, that's a very toxic environment, right? And you don't, you know, as a Muslim, you shouldn't be in there, right?
Also, it depends on objective.
It depends on the objective as well. Like, what are they trying to do as an organization? You know what I mean? Like, because when you're working for an look, the basic of most organizations is that you'll probably work for it's a halal objective. You know, whether it's a Big Four, whether it's a medical firm or hospital or whatever government agency, the general objective is halal. You know what I mean? But if you find you're in a company where it's first of all the objective of the company is haram, then according to those stock filters, then well your relationship shouldn't be there. Like for example, classic example is a bank, right? A lot of scholars have said, look, it's interesting. This was an interesting point. So generally, you hear mashayikh scholars say, look, a bank is haram, so it's haram, right? But I heard a very interesting statement from, and I'll share this because you, mashallah, you're a more sensible crowd. You're not going to sort of cut me and use me as a meme or something and go, oh, he said this. So, but if you said a Sheikh, so Sheikh Ali Qaradaghi, so a really famous contemporary Sheikh, he was asked a similar question about working in a bank. And I'm sharing this because it's actually quite interesting what he said. He goes, look, generally the basis is, because it's haram, you shouldn't be there, it's haram to work there. He said, but however, he said this, right? If you're going there to get a specific skill, then he sees maybe if you put certain criteria there, he would allow for that, right? So I'm not saying it's allowable, but I'm just saying that it becomes the job of the community and the mashayikh in the community to support these things. For example, I'll give you a perfect example, right? For example, Islamic finance, okay? Where do we get our financial experience in operating a financial institution from? Like, do you just hire some dude that used to work at Apple and run it? Yeah, well, you can do that, which is what Iqbal felt. Is that a good option? I don't know, right? Or do you say that, okay, we need, and this is in all sciences, right? Like politically, marketing, all that stuff, right? Or do we get together as a group of mashayikh, ANIC, right, which I'm a member of, right? And we sit there and say, look, we need ABC for our community. So us as mashayikh, we're going to back our youth to do these three subjects. As mashayikh, we see that we need financial, for example, we need Islamic insurance in the company, in the country. How do we do that? Do we just hire a brother that just studied, arts at UNSW, and he's going to establish a insurance firm? No, man, it doesn't work like that. The world doesn't work like that. So do you start to then question, well, do we send our youth to work, or do we, encourage certain people, Muslims working in insurance, to gain that experience and then come back and do that in community? Perhaps, right? But you can't make those decisions at an individual level. You need to make that at a mashayikh and a communal level to give the youth that support to do these things, right? But as a general basis, if a company is doing haram, then it's haram, right? The general basis, well, why do you want to work for a bank, But if you really want to, if you have those opinions where, look, I want to work for a bank because A, B, C, D, then go see a sheikh. He's like the GP, right? He'll go, he knows the medicine, he knows all the fatwa that are out there. He'll come to you and say, oh, okay, in your situation, maybe it might be, right? But it's dangerous when you start making these fatwa for yourself, right? The whole point of going to see a sheikh is that on the day of judgment, when you meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you want to have barriers in front of you. You want to say you want to have shields, human shields, they're really what you're doing. Seriously, right? I took this opinion from this sheikh. I took this opinion from all this big body of organization of mashayikh. I'm standing behind them, so that's what you really got to think about so you should be very careful. And I think a lot of people fall into this trap where they'll read a fatwa and they'll use their own intellect to apply it in their lives, right? Which is very dangerous. You hear a fatwa, go have a discussion with a sheikh about it, someone that's learned about it, to discuss whether it applies to your life, right? And I think that's the key thing you need to do. You need, as you progress and you're looking for jobs, okay, please have the discussions and conversations with learned people that in your community, right? When you get these opportunities that come up that you may feel, oh, I'm not too sure, or they're pushing Zionism, or whatever, speak to someone about it. Never make these decisions yourself, because you want to. The whole point of the scholars and all these books and this is to protect you, essentially, right? Yeah, sorry.
With the example of Zubair, when he said that he would prefer to take something as a debt instead of a trust, I understand the incentive from his perspective, which is that if you take it as a trust, then you could essentially invest that money in something, gain more money.
If you take it as a debt, if you take it as a debt,
If you take it as a debt, you could essentially, for example, you take 200 and you invest it in something, you get 500 back, you only have to pay 200 and you make 300 in profit. So I understand the incentive from that perspective. But out of curiosity, what would be the incentive from someone who's giving, what would be the incentive for someone to give it as a debt instead of a trust? Because from what I understood, the idea behind giving as a trust is that you have something valuable that you need taken care of and you can't do it yourself. So why would someone ever give it as a debt instead of a trust?
Yeah, good question. So it's like a bank, right? Look, there's things that is tradable. It's like a currency, right? If it's gold coins, then you don't really care if it's this particular gold coin or whatever. But if it's important to you, then you would just say, no, look, I want to keep it as a trust, right? But if it's a currency that you use for trading purposes, it's like your cash, right? Does it really matter you have this particular $10 note? Maybe for some people it might. They want to see this particular face or whatever. But generally, if it's a trading currency, then it's not there, right? So that's how. So his principles, he took it as a debt. So if people really wanted to have a trust, then they'll probably end up going to someone else, right, for their safekeeping. So he's providing a different service there, more like a. You can see it's more like a bank, right? When you put your money in a bank, it's actually a debt for the bank, you know? Yeah, it's a good question there, yeah. Yeah, bro.
You know how you said that there's like thresholds that dictate, like this is back to the stock thing, but like there's thresholds that dictate what you can invest in and whatnot, and then I don't know if it was an arbitrary number that you threw out as like a 5% thing, but like what are the determining factors, and I know it might be a bit nitty gritty, but
Yeah.
the determining factors of like a number like 5%?
Yeah, that's a great question. No. Beautiful question. So there's two major percentages that they would use, right? One is if if the company has greater than 30% of their. So can I just get a raise of hands? How many people are studying commerce and finance? So I just know how to. Okay. What's everyone else studying? Like what? Arts, medicine, engineering?
Most of them STEM.
Engineering, STEM. Okay. No, that's fine. So there's this thing called. So if the debt that the company has is greater than the total value of the company, so if the company has more than 30% of the total value of the company in debt, then that is one of the filters. It becomes impermissible to invest in, right?
So total value of the company, enterprise value?
Market cap. So basically, the total value of the company they call market capitalization, which you get from multiplying the share price in the market by the number of shares in the company, right? But that's the total value of the company, so they'll say 30%. Now, where do you get this 30%? You know, there's an interesting hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ said, "Thuluth kathir," right? And a third is a lot, right? But that particular hadith, it actually comes from the chapter of inheritance. So Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, he approached the Prophet ﷺ and said, I'm getting old and so forth, I want to donate my money, I want to give it away, right? And the Prophet ﷺ said, restrict, no, just give away a third. Keep the rest for your inheritance and your children and so forth. Give away a third. So from this hadith, it's really beautiful, right? This hadith is actually applied in chapters of worship as well, right? In some madhabs, they'll say, look, when you make wudu on your head, a third is enough. Likewise, they like to apply this hadith in this filtering. They'll say a third is a lot based on that hadith. So that's where they get the 30% from. Now, the argument against that is, well, it's a third is a lot in halal, but this is 30% haram. You know, so that's where the difference of opinion of scholars come from, right? So some scholars will use the hadith and say, look, a third is a lot, so we're going to use this as our benchmark. And other scholars will say, well, what do you mean a third is a lot? Like a third, you're speaking about this hadith is about halal. You got Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas radiyallahu anhu is talking about giving his wealth away, right? Fi sabilillah. And you're comparing that to modern day debt, right? So those are the arguments. But that's how they get 30%. And the 5%, it comes from the books of Hanafi fiqh where they speak about, what is the percentage of a transaction where they feel that you can invalidate the transaction because you've been cheated, right? The arbitrary number is 5% approximately, and then scholars come back and say, yeah, but that's you're talking about buying and selling here, you're not talking about making haram 5% interest income, right? So That's where those arbitrary, they're not arbitrary, they're based on hadith, but then the argument then comes, well, are they actually applicable? And that's when you've got to learn from the chapters of principle, usul al-fiqh, the principle of fiqh, where you make qiyas and say, okay, well, here are the principles of qiyas, here's the basis, here's what it's made in, and then it goes on. Yeah. Sorry, was it? Who was first?
Yeah, who was first?
MC, bro, come on.
Yeah,
Don't look at me. Look at the crowd.
Yeah.
Do scholars also look at the capital structure of companies? Because some companies take on a lot of debt, whereas other companies take on much less.
Correct.
Is
Yes.
that a consideration?
Yes, that's the 30%, right? So if their debt is, if they take on more than 30% of the market value of the company, then that becomes a filter, and then that 30% is taken from the hadith of inheritance and giving away.
So not only their business, but also not only the income they make, but also like the income they take, I guess, or the money they take.
Yeah, that's right. So this 30%, it's not only, that's not income or expenses, that is the amount of riba-based debt they have on their balance sheet.
Sister behind.
This is kind of related, but when we're using a card, say even though it's not a credit card,
Yeah.
it's often a surcharge, and from my understanding that ends up at the bank. Correct me if I'm wrong, but is there any issue with that? Or
Is this, you mean when you pay with a debit card, or is it, or?
yeah, like say if I'm paying for a coffee, they're like, oh, 30% surcharge.
Right.
30% surcharge.
All right, and that's a service fee. That's just a general service
how do
fee
you-
that's
what's
taken.
Like, how do you know that's service fee? Like, what's the sort of general framework? Like, service fee, how does that differentiate between interest?
All right, because in that transaction, if you really think about it, you are paying for a service. You're not getting anything back. You know what I mean? If you paid them and they gave you the money back plus that service fee, then you'll start questioning, I don't know. But because you're just paying that and you're paying an additional to cover that, it's just money going out of your pocket. You're not actually receiving anything back. So that's not, that takes it completely out of the chapter of debt. Rather, it's just a purchase transaction with a little fee because of the use of the service. Yeah. Oh, can I just add though? So that's different to a credit card, where when you use a credit card, you're actually then borrowing money from the bank, right? And then the bank charges you a percentage. Then, well, you got a debt with the bank now, and you're paying interest. So that becomes.
And credit cards, the haram, or what's the?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, credit cards. So when you sign up a credit card, the contract says that you owe whatever you take out of the credit card plus 5 or 6 percentage points in general, right? But I have known that there are certain places. So, but look, my personal perspective, I found that when I went to Malaysia, and hence my story about Malaysia, I love going to Malaysia, but the hotels there and the car hire companies there, they don't take debit cards at all. So I had a lot of problems there last time I went. Had to call our cousin and had to use my cousin's credit card. So this time I went over, we got a credit card that we never used, but just so I can actually use that to make my life simpler when I'm there, but I don't intend to use it. But there are certain circumstances where scholars say, look, if it's required and you actually do need to use it for transacting in that country, not with the intention of borrowing money, but just using it because you can't actually use a debit card, then that's why, years and years ago, before the debit card, scholars used to be a bit more lax on the credit card. They'll say, oh, look, Carlos, you can use the credit card, as long as you don't intend to use the interest or borrow money, right? But now there's debit card, that's all kind of gone out the window. Generally, like in Australia, we don't need credit
Some
cards.
brothers are like, oh yeah, I'll just use the credit card, I'll pay on time.
For the points and stuff?
And you get the points and stuff.
Yeah,
So
so
they can't do that? No.
that is a very, like we spoke about, man, like you have these things to keep you safe for your deen. Like, why do you want to play at the borders? You know what I mean? Like, why do you want to just, there's so much of this big area Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you. Modern day transactions have progressed so significantly. You have debit cards, right? And then now you want to sign this contract just because you want to get some extra points. It's more worthwhile to manage your finances properly and to just buy those things that you want rather than collecting all these points. Yeah.
Question over there.
So I had a question. Basically, it was about talked about when you're dealing with certain like jobs, you want to make sure
Yeah.
there was like some filters, right? And the Sheikh talked about. So I wrote these down. I mean,
I'll give you the
I'm not sure-
filters later. Like, yeah.
Are you gonna go?
I'll send it to
Yeah, I'll
Hasib
send
so you can
I'll
clearly
send
see
you
it.
guys- I'll send it in community.
You don't need to write it, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like I just wrote it down here for reference though. That what you said, that one of them was like you have to check if more than 33% of the profits are haram.
Yeah, but this is not in regards to working for a company. That's in regards to investing, owning a part of the company. You know what I mean? So there's a difference there. So one is you're working for the company, and one is you're investing in the company. When you're investing in the company, it's quite clear-cut. Well, it's quite simple. That there's certain filters, and you can invest according to these filters, right? If you're working for a company, generally you want the objectives of the company to be halal. Yeah. And even if that's so, like perhaps they might have certain areas of their business where, for example, they have a treasury, they have money in bank and they're earning interest on that. But that doesn't affect your employment relationship and how they pay you as an employee, because even if the company has their money in the bank, right, and there's a bit of interest there, that ruling that transaction is haram does not apply to your relationship in your employment contract, because that employment contract is halal and they're paying you for your services using their halal activities, right? And Imam Ibn Qudama, and he writes a very comparative fiqh, a very interesting book. Anyone studies Hanbali fiqh, right? Ibn Qudama is a famous name, mashallah. He writes in his book about dealing with people that have mixed income. He said, look, if you know definitely for sure that the money you're receiving from this person is haram, you shouldn't deal with that person. For example, if you know this guy's a drug dealer, all his money is from, no, actually even worse, just say this guy's a thief, all his assets he's taken from stealing, right? Then his opinion is, look, if everything's haram in his life and he's going to deal with you, that's going to be haram, whatever you're going to get. You're going to be taking other people's assets, right? And he said, look, the more, he puts out a spectrum, the more that occurs, the more haram it could be, right? But generally speaking, if someone has mixed assets where, look, they have their money in the bank, it's maybe collecting some interest there like the company, but their dealings are through selling chairs or selling computers, that is halal wealth. They're dealing in a proper sale, a transaction there, which then filters through for your income, right? So it's taking that into perspective, right? Yeah.
I had it like, there was another one I written down, was something like if 33% of the company's market share is in debt, something like that.
Yeah.
Right?
I'll send it to Hasib, yeah.
Was that related to?
That was related to investing. Not actually sort of working. But at the same time, I encourage everyone, and I think because you'll come to these challenges when you're seeking jobs, when you get into the workplace, you're like, oh, you're not sure, you're ifanaring, Speak to a sheikh. Speak to someone knowledgeable to give you that perspective. Speak to someone that's more experienced to give you that perspective to frame your decision. Yeah.
Could I add one more? How would you
I
actually?
can just switch the question to Yeah, you can still ask it.
I just want to, like, how would you actually research as this info of how much they're in debt or what's their market share or whatever? How would you?
Yeah, so like I said, so there are programs that do that, a paid service, or you can just look at their balance sheets, right? Because all public traded companies, they're required to report on a quarterly basis, and then on a quarterly basis you can see, their balance sheets, their income expenses, and so forth, right? What these programs do really well is they'll include and exclude these companies quarterly based on these reports, right? Whereas it takes a lot of effort if you go out there, and which you can, because it's publicly available information to then sift through their financial statements.
Okay. We've got a few questions online as well, so we'll just come back to you guys in a second. So one of the brothers...
From where?
So it's on Zoom.
Oh, right, okay.
All right, so one of the brothers is like, If working in the bank is not permissible, then our salaries and daily transactions are done through banks. Means we are supporting the banks in a way. Is that okay? And what should we do about it?
Yeah, so going back to that point, did I make that point clear here though for everyone? Like, you know, as a general principle, right, working for a bank is not permissible because of the haram income that they make. There's a general principle there. However, I have known certain mashaykh in the community, they're a bit more lax and they'll say, look, you're only dealing with a specific aspect of, you know, the company and so forth, right? So in this issue, you know, bring these concerns that you have to the sheikh and have those discussions about what you're doing and so forth, right? Because it's very difficult. I can provide a general principle, but does that actually apply to you? For example, if someone came up to me and said, look, I applied for 50 jobs, my family's in hardship, I got no money at all. The only job that I could literally get for this past year is this bank job. Like, what am I gonna, don't ask me, what are you gonna say if you were the sheikh? It doesn't become, yes, the shariah is always important, but what are you going to say? How are you going to address that issue yourself? You automatically think, okay, yes, there's the shariah, but then you also think about the shariah is vast. There are certain circumstances where it's okay, but it's not ideal. You know, it's very complex. We don't live in a stock standard, you know, Islamic society, right? And all those factors need to be considered. That's why I'm saying, like, you should really, when you come down to these situations, ask someone. And I'll give you a personal example as well. You know, I deal in Islamic finance. A brother calls me, he said, look, he paid a $100,000 deposit to build a house. He got an approval from a certain Islamic financial institution. Alhamdulillah, it's not, of course it's not ICFAL because we're amazing, right? But a certain financial institution, but then now with interest rates rising and his income not rising at the same amount, at the time where he was able to purchase his home or fulfill the rest of his contract to build the house, he went to the Islamic financial institution and they said, look, no, we can no longer finance you. And he already sunk based on that agreement, initial agreement, he already sunk $100,000 into this property. So if he doesn't proceed with the contract, he will lose $100,000, his life savings, right? Or does he then go to the bank and take a riba loan? I'm asking you this question, what are you going to say, right? It's not that black, white, clear cut. There's so many things. We're discussing these things sometimes at an academic level, but when you actually apply it in your own practical lives, you need a lot of guidance because every situation is different. Well, so for this brother, what does he do? Does he just give up, mashallah, his 100,000?
Yeah.
Does he go to the bank? What does he do? Right, they're very difficult questions to answer. Right? It's not that clear cut. You know, so when we're discussing these things, I want you to just take a step back. These are the general principles, but it's important to apply them wisely. And who's going to give you that wisdom? The Islamic wisdom is speak to community seniors, speak to mashaykh, have a jama'ah. You know, I gave a khutbah just last week about the importance of, you know, during these times, right, you need a community. And that works two ways, right? The community backs you up when you're in need, and the community, the jama'ah, it provides you with an outlet of all your energy and all your resources so you work more efficiently, right? Same thing, all of us should be attached to a community, to a jama'ah. So when we have these issues, we know exactly who to ask. You don't want to be stuck out there like I know many brothers and sisters stuck out there, they're not with a jama'ah, and suddenly they have these really deep, important questions. What do? Like, they stress out, it's really stressful. But if they had this jama'ah, this mosque, this center that they go to throughout their lives, that they've been cultivating these relationships, it becomes an easier, less stressful process. They know exactly who to speak to, who to talk to, where to get help, and so forth.
So what if you don't have that access to, like, a jama'ah? Like,
to start building. Oh, look, that's why, alhamdulillah, we start these conversations young, right? You know, I want to put that chart back up. You start these conversations when you're younger, where you have all the time in the world, you have less of these worries about finances and family and so forth. You're not thinking about sinking $200,000 to build a house, right? You build these community relationships now, and it's important to keep those as you even become busy with your life. Because what's going to happen, normally, I see it all the time, subhanAllah. This, mashallah, you have a lot of time, You think, man, I'm working 9 to 5 job. Oh, it's so busy. It's not busy, man. Trust me. When the kids come along, khalas. You know, and the kids come along, and even if you're in your 30s and you don't have kids and you're still living with your parents, there's still so much more responsibilities, right? And it's really important throughout these stages of your life to keep with the community or have some kind of community, because I see many brothers and sisters lose that when they become less busy and they don't continue cultivating these relationships. And it's not only about, like, you don't need to be a member of the organizing committee of a mosque, you know, but you can just go to their events. Like, it's that sort of thing, spending the small amount of time with that community so you know where to turn for. That's extremely important, because I've seen many things happen. Brothers turn away from the deen, like all this kind of stuff, because they step away from that, you know, and it's very detrimental. That's why, alhamdulillah, Prophet ﷺ said, you know, alaykum bi jama'ah, yani, upon you is this community, right? And yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
What would you say are some like halal investment strategies we can start looking at? Because like having money in the bank is kind of pointless because inflation is going up. So like where can we like invest to like keep growing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So look, obviously, you know, the investment in financial industry is highly regulated, right? So what I always have to tell people is this is not personal financial advice. This is just general advice about what products that are out there. You know, if you look at our community, you'll have organizations, you know, like ICFAL that finance houses, right? So if you want exposure to real estate without buying a house, then there are certain income funds out there that you invest, and they'll give you a return of whatever they get, right? That's one option. Other options are you can go to the stock, you know, and play that and invest into it's picking individual stocks is very difficult. You know, a lot of people lose money. What a lot of experts recommend is what they tell you to purchase is these things called, they call it ETF, exchange traded funds, right? So basically these are a basket of shares that this fund buys. So you'll invest $100 in this share, but it will give you exposure to different stocks, right? And there are Islamic ETFs, exchange traded funds, that you can invest in that provide you with diverse exposure to different halal stocks according to their field. So they do all the work, all the filtering. You just invest and buy, right? And there's interesting, so I know there's 2 on the Australian Stock Exchange at the moment from Hijaz. It's called Islam, is it? There's one Islam, there's 2. Yeah, there's 2. And then there are also many options in the US as well. So you open you open an account, and then you can convert your money into US dollars, and then you can invest these US dollars into these exchange traded funds. And also there's also like halal crowdfunding platforms these days that are gaining prominence, where it's structured in a Islamic compliant way, where you can invest in micro projects in the developing world, and then you also get a dividend for that as well. I can also
you can forward to me.
the name, just prompt me, and then I'll respond and give you some names that you can look at.
So, Sheikh, is there a new question? No.
Yeah,
Oh yeah, I'll just go with this one. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, what are the pros and cons of investing, and is it good to start like early? Should we
Yeah, so definitely start early. So, I told Hasib a few times as well, like the time when you're not caring and you're worry-free about money, that's probably the best time you start thinking about it, because what's going to happen, and based on my experience in the industry, people reach 30 to 40 and they have family, and then now they're thinking about a house, and then, but I didn't save for the past 10 years and so forth. If you really think about it, inshallah, you're all employed in standard jobs that pay you 80K. I don't know how much they pay. What are the grad salaries? 60?
90? 89?
Oh, 90K, mashallah. Maybe for actuaries or something, I don't know. Is it? I don't know. Whatever, right? So whatever it is, if you multiply that by 10 and you give yourself a 5% increase every year, technically by 10 years, you should have been grossing, inshallah, like $1 million, if you really think about it, right? That's your gross income for 10 years. You literally had a mil gross income in 10 years, right? So if you actually thought long term, then it's about investing along the way to really compound that and get better returns on that.
But I heard in investing there's like some risk. Like
Yes. So that's anyone that's investing. It's really important to think about your risk profile. So there are certain assets that are highly volatile, like stocks and shares. You know, you invest one day, boom, it rises 10%, 20%, or Bitcoin, Allahu Akbar, you know, it goes crazy. It's really volatile, right? Or there's more stable assets like, you know, real estate funds where they're investing in houses and stuff, where at the end of the day, there's always going to be risk. If you just put your money on the table, there's a lot, obviously that's less risky, right? So it's about constructing your asset allocation. Okay, I feel a bit this risk averse. I want to keep 50% in cash, but I'm going to use 25% in investing in sort of real estate through these various funds. I'm going to use perhaps another 25% to play in stocks because it's more volatile. So it's about how you sort of allocate your assets. Yeah.
Why would you do that?
Sorry?
Why would you do that?
To reduce the risk, right? So if stocks are really risky, just say they have 20% volatility, right? Normally with income funds, the volatility is like nothing, marginal, right? And then cash, the volatility is nothing. It just sits on the table. You lose money when the inflation goes too high, right? So you'll think about, so each asset class will have its risk, and you should judge that based on its return. Normally financial managers, planners, they'll say, look, when you're young, you can invest riskier, so go with like the stocks and shares and stuff. But just be careful as well, because at the moment, you know, they'll say, there's a really interesting strategy. They'll say this thing of dollar cost averaging. So what it means is basically, you don't look at it, just every month you put a particular amount into your investment fund, and then you look at it in 5 years' time, because that takes into account all the volatility and that grows over time, right? And I do recommend, look, it's difficult to capture in one session, but there are also many. I encourage you to read those wealth management books that are out there, those financial planning books. They'll give you an idea of how you can implement a few of those strategies, and it's important to start.
Is there any recommendations, any books?
Yeah, I'll send some as well. So it was a follow-up question, or?
I reckon we'll just start with the.
Okay.
I don't think you answered the bank one.
Oh, sorry, what was it?
So it's like, oh yeah, if working in banks is not permissible, then our salaries and transactions are done through banks, and that means we're supporting them, apparently. So
right, yeah. So that's why. Well, that's exactly right. So that's why it's important to have our own Islamic financial infrastructure. In the absence of that, yes, like we are indirectly supporting this, right? And we can just keep with the status quo and just, you know, do that, or we can, when Islamic options come along, support those Islamic options, right?
I remember you talking about in a podcast, I don't know if it was NZF, the one with President Omani, you were talking about how if Muslims had the money, we can call the shots, right? But so right now, so we're seeing this Palestinian issue as well, and a lot of people, like some people are very, they're like they don't want to like scream out, or like they don't want to, like they're a bit scared of showing support for the cause because of, you know, career sort of implications. In that sense, how do we work around that? Because I think my hypothesis, my red hot take was, if Muslims had the money and we had the infrastructure, then we have the power to be able to sort of speak out for these causes, right? Is that like how do we build that infrastructure? That's the thing I'm asking.
Yeah, but look, I think first of all, it's really interesting because, you know, sometimes in some parts of the world, Muslims have a lot of money, but we're still not doing anything, right? That's when fitnah, wealth, becomes a fitnah that you fail absolutely, curse, right? Not you. It becomes an absolute curse, right? But a general take on this is that, look, yes, it's important. When you really think about it through Islamic history, you study Islamic history, Andalus, what happened in Spain, Salahuddin, you'll be like, throughout Islamic history, when the the Muslims had the influence and the dominance on a global level, it's when they had infrastructure and they were dominant from all aspects, from business, militarily, politically, literature, thought. So when they were actually ahead. So, I'm not saying that you have to make money, but excel in whatever you do. Whatever field that you have in STEM or whatever, right? Excel in those things, and those opportunities to influence and those opportunities to make a change would come. Because if your skill is in high demand and you're very good at what you do, then yes, the money is going to come, and then it's what you do with that money that becomes your test, right? We can't sit back and say, look, I don't want that test. I'm just going to sit in the masjid, pray, Quran, etc. But there's a really interesting quote by a famous commander, I think in Afghanistan. He said, look, man asha saghiran mata saghiran. Whoever lives small, they die small, right? Yeah. Whoever lives small dies. Man asha saghiran mata saghiran. Whoever lives small, they die small. And then he goes, man asha li ummatihi azima. Whoever lives for the greatness of his ummah, mata what? Azima. He dies great, right? So it's the path that you want to take. Yeah, you can be average, you'll die average, or you can try to really push the boundaries of what you can do in your own capacity, and you will pass away that way. And even if you don't get to that level, so the whole point of this is you're going to have, inshallah, you come out of this, you have a plan, you have something to. What I normally do from here is I have an exercise where it's like, okay, imagine you had $50 million, what are you actually going to do? And we discussed that, right? But you come out of this thinking, okay, you have some rough idea what you want to do, and then you work towards that. Even if you don't reach that goal, inshallah, that's why we have the hadith, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, your actions are by intention. So you're rewarded, inshallah, for all that, even if you don't get there. It's about trying, right? It's about trying. But if you look at how the Ummah was great previously, it wasn't through sitting in the masjids, and it was through actions in all aspects
Could you
of
say the story
society.
about like the 15-year-old getting chased by the wolf?
Yeah, he told me to repeat this story again. Well, again, you like this story, yeah, but it's not a story. So, it's a real.
Crazy story.
So, if you look at the history of Andalus, right, there was a time we all know it was opened by Tariq bin Ziyad. There was years and years of successful rule, but then there was a period of decline in Andalus. It started going down because of why? The same thing. It happens in every community, interfighting, blah, 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 usually happens. And at that time, the Umayyah dynasty of the Islamic Khalifa was also in decline. It was being taken over by the Abbasiyun, right? So they took over, but there was still a prince, right? Abdul Rahman ad-Dakhil, they call him, Sakhr Quraysh, right? So he was in Baghdad at that time, and he saw the black flags, and he knew that they were out to kill him, because that's what they do back in those days. They're going to kill every single heir to the throne, all that stuff, to get rid of everyone. It's very vicious.
How old was he again?
And he was at that time 15 or 16. Yeah? And this is, he narrates his story in his own words, right? That if you don't reflect on it, you don't think much about it, but when you actually think about it, it's quite deep. He said, look, at that time he was playing, he goes, I was 15 or 16 at that time. He was playing with his son, right? And I saw these black flags surrounding the city. So I quickly grabbed my brother, he was younger than me, I think 12, 13. Maybe it was 14 and 12. I can't remember that age group. So I grabbed my brother, I took some money, I left my child with my family, and he fled, right? So he fled from Baghdad all the way to northern Africa, all the way to Morocco, and then he managed to gather an army to invade Andalus, Spain, and to unify all of Andalus under his rule by the time he was 23 years old, or something, by the time he was in his 20s, right? But when you actually reflect back on that, first of all, what is he talking about? What? How old was he when he was talking about his son? Was it 14 or 16? So you can see back then that the princes that were raised differently, they were taught to mature a lot younger. When I was 14, I just want to play games. I don't know what I want to do, right? So the tarbiyah, the education they had for these princes, right? When you really think about how he got there, right? As a teenager, he had the skills and the capability and the strategy to get himself, and the survival techniques, to get himself from Baghdad all the way to Egypt, right? Him and his brother. No, actually, they ended up slaughtering his brother because they caught his brother. But he made that journey all by himself. He played politics, spoke to all his uncles, got in touch with all these people, raised himself an army by the time he was 20, and took over like an entire nation. Mate, he doesn't get that from sitting in the masjid reading Quran. It's used as a bait, so I'm not dissing that. It's important. I'm sure he would have sat in the masjid and read Quran, but he complemented that, his Islamic studies, with life skills, right? All these different aspects of his life, they needed to come together for him to be a great leader, right? He needed to study the arts of war. He needed to study politics. He needed to study behavior. He needed to study psychology, like all these things to be a great leader. He studied all that, and then to be able to raise an army and to become one of the most successful rulers of Andalus throughout history and unify the whole country for, decades after that. Subhanallah, like all the skills that he actually acquired during that time in his youth, right? Which really emphasizes that when we were great back in the day, it wasn't because people just read Quran. They read Quran, but they applied and they pushed it to the absolute boundaries to achieve their best based on these basic principles about achieving the best you can in life, living great and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely. So when it comes to, let's say, because I'm going to graduate in like a couple of semesters, in 2 semesters, right? And I don't know about everyone else's situation. So when you get to corporate, right, and you start working, I hear a lot of stories that brothers get sort of, they get burnt out. They're like, I'm working as a corporate slave. I want to study more deen, that sort. So is there like, what are some tips you can give, or like, what is like the vision that you can give and the advice that you can give to the brothers? Yeah. Brothers out there suffering.
And that's what, look, and I was there, look, and I was in the same boat. My wife was in the same boat, right? Like, so she, I'll give a story from her. So she, graduated, mashallah, doctor, whatever, wanted to get out in the field. Her first year, she found that it was just so hard. She wanted to just quit the whole thing, right? But then it wasn't afterwards when we went overseas and really reevaluated, what's our purpose, what we wanted to do, that you come back with a bit more purpose and vision, right? So the reason why you go into corporate and you get burnt out is because you haven't thought about this journey for yourself, right? And everyone's journey is different. Your target could be, okay, look, I just want to have a house and and a beautiful husband or a beautiful wife to live with, get married, happy, which is fine, right? But you need to have this goal or understanding of where you're headed as a result of your work. If you have no goals from your work, you'll get burnt out. But if you have an actual goal set, something that you really wanted to do, whether it's changing the ummah, participating in the community, that changes your perspective of how you view your work. So then you change your work as something that's cursed into something that, it's hard, but it reminds you of Allah, it reminds you of why you're doing it. So it's really getting your intention correct. And that's why the scholars say this intention is really important. When you go to work and you're working those 10 hours, if you don't have an intention or a purpose, it burns you out.
What's
so
the
it's really,
what's the intention?
it could be anything. Like, that's what I'm saying. Like, the intention is up to the individual person. They need to reflect on that. I can tell you what your intention should be, but that's my intention for you. You know what I mean? I can tell, but you should go work because we need to establish Islamic finance infrastructure, but you might not want that. That could just be really boring for you, right? So the key message is that take a step back and really think about, how you want to contribute to the ummah, how you want to make the ummah great, right? So then we're just not reactively responding to events all the time, but rather, okay, we're responding to an event with as much energy that we have now, but thinking further into the future of how we can strategically plan our lives to achieve certain goals in the future.
Definitely.
All right?
Questions?
Yeah.
So I just wanted to ask, it kind of really doesn't make sense to me how Islamic financing is Islamic. Like, I don't mean to sound, I know what I'm talking about, or that it's wrong, I just don't understand it. How can you implement the same, basically the same thing that non-Muslim banks do, but call it Islamic? Like, how does it work? How do they make it Islamic?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And I think a lot of people echo the same sentiments. Like it's not a rare question. People ask that all the time, and there are a few things that I think cause that. Right. Number one, I feel that the organisations themselves haven't been doing a good enough job to educate the community. Right. It's not, the onus is not on you guys to educate yourselves to understand what they're doing. The onus should be on the organisations to educate. And I think that has been done extremely poorly in the past. It's been a push approach where they just want to show you a certificate. That's it, man. Take it, right? Yeah, just look at this, bro. They shove it in your face, which is quite frustrating as me as a practitioner, because I truly believe in the education piece. So that's number one, right? Number two, the key difference, it'll probably sound like a broken record, but because they probably tell you all the time, right? There's trade and there's riba, right? But how does the challenge with how it's implemented in the Islamic finance is generally implemented, in my personal opinion, is that they've sort of re-engineered it backwards they've taken a conventional a conventional loan contract, and they've re-engineered it to say, okay, no, we're going to change interest to ijara, rate of return. So they would change certain words, and they would then provide the contract, right? And then it will come. Your question is great, right? Then you'll be like, well, how is that actually different, right? They should be saying that, okay, one is interest, one is rent. That's here, okay. Okay, but when I'm paying rental, what are all the different characteristics of a contract that make it a rental contract, right? So, maybe some of us are renting right now. When you're renting a house, if the house burns down, you don't need to pay rent, right? Rental laws say that they can only increase rent once a year. When you're in a rental contract, Islamic finance contract, they don't do that, right? So it's a matter of implementing certain aspects of the rules to make a contract Islamic, but there are actually many other Islamic principles that are not applied in those contracts. For example, I'm going to give a presentation about rental contract, Islamic finance contracts in Australia, and how the rental piece is dealt with in Australia. That is not, how can I say it, that is not entirely implemented. With Australian National University, right? So in a typical rental contract, if the house burns down, you don't need to pay rent. In these ijara contracts, this term is not in there, although it's meant to be in there, right? In your typical rental contract, rent can only be increased once every 12 months if it's an ongoing contract. It's not done here. So you as a consumer now, you're seeing these contradictions. Well, this is how a rental works, and this is how you're working. It's more similar to a typical banking transaction, and hence all these questions come. But then if I tell you, hey, hold on, there's actually another model out there where when you're Islamically financing the house and you're paying rent, but your rent is not pegged to the interest rate, the rent is actually pegged to whatever the rental rate of return is going on in that suburb. Did you know that also that if you sell your house, you sell it at a loss, that we also share a part of that loss because it's a partnership? So when you hear stuff, and that's done because that's how we do it, right? So when I give you that example, you're like, oh, okay, that actually sounds more Islamic, right? Then you say, okay, did you know that the fixed cost that you pay in that property, your water bills and your council fees, we share that as well, right? So now, your perspective is different. You're like, okay, that sounds like that's that sort of contract, but this sounds more like a proper partnership, right? So then you start getting a better appreciation of, okay, this is truly rental and this is interest, right? But going back to basic Islamic principles, how it works is if I have an asset, I'm renting it to Hasib. Hasib is giving me money. That's that transaction, right? A riba transaction is I'm giving money to Hasib and he's giving me money back. So if I'm renting him this product, I still have responsibility for that product to maintain it, to make sure it's running well, to make sure that he can use that product properly because I'm the owner of that product, right? If it's just a money transaction, I'm just giving him money, he's giving me money back. So those are the two key differences of those transactions from a Islamic level.
Risk as well.
Sorry, I know it's yeah, like I taught, I did it's online, you can see it as well. I spoke about Islamic house finance for like 5 hours or something, you know. Yeah. So if you're bored, and you know, you're in the car or on the train, you can watch them. But that particular, just Islamic house finance was a 5-hour sort of presentation just to unpack the different elements of it. But if you really wanted to unpack it, I recommend those talks. Just watch it a bit at a time. It will take you through in detail how the different aspects of those contracts work. Yeah.
Easy. We got one question online. So this question has 2 questions. So first question is, if a person suspects that a portion of their income might be haram, for example, money from superannuation. So superannuation is probably another different topic as well. So if the portion of their income is haram, how do we purify it?
Okay, so so it really depends on, so is that from investing in shares or is that interest? So for example, if you have a bank account and you receive interest income, then that interest income is clearly defined, it's clearly accounted for. You should be donating that, right? You should go and donate that. If it's, for example, through investing in a particular share, so if you invest in, for example, Apple shares, you know that 2% of its income is from interest, then you apply 2% to if 2% of the company is from its income, right? You estimate your particular share of that 2%, and then you'll donate that. Yeah. So for example, you own 0.0001% of that particular share. This company earns $100 million in interest. You'll say 0.0001 of that 100%, you donate that, right? And that's why I tell people sometimes maybe it's easier to invest in a Islamic fund or a Islamic exchange traded fund or ICFA, whatever, because you don't need to deal with that. But it's particular for shares, right? It's easier not to invest individually in shares because all these things you need to do yourself. If you let someone else do it for you, then you avoid all that sort of headache. But if you can isolate it, that particular haram income, then you isolate it and you donate it.
And I think, so the example here is superannuation. So that's like another topic in itself. So obviously superannuation, they obviously, like the money they get, the premiums and stuff, they invest in like military and stuff, right? Military, drugs.
Well, it depends on what super. You can have halal, Islamic super, I don't know, right?
Islamic, as a Muslim, so which super do we turn to? So if I start working right now, do I just go Australian super and just or get a self-managed super fund? What do I do?
Yeah, there are a few options. So normally when you're younger in your career, your superannuation is quite small, so it wouldn't make sense for you financially to have a self-managed super fund because the fees and charges in a self-managed super fund is in the thousands and thousands of dollars, right? So it might not sort of be worthwhile. So normally in the market at the moment, there's basically 2. You have Crescent and you have Hijaz. So you should compare the fees between the 2. You should compare the performance between the 2 and then select accordingly. It doesn't make sense to self-manage your super until your super balance is actually quite large.
I think Crescent has like a minimum amount of money.
They got a minimum now? Okay.
I'm not sure. Is it true? Does anyone have a Crescent superannuation?
Yeah.
I think I read it in one
So
of your
there's two.
Facebook posts. I don't know.
Yep.
But yeah.
Maybe it's different.
Is it?
I think I remember, yeah. But it's always changing. Sometimes I have more, sometimes I have less. Yeah.
But if that's the case, what do I do?
So there's two. Oh, right, okay. Good question. Look, there's a few options. So you can what about hijaz? Is there a minimum there? Okay, look.
Well, let's say like
It's
worst case
just say worst case scenario, and I think I've answered this somewhere before. So just say worst case scenario, your super is so small that you can't invest in any of the Islamic funds, right? The options you have there are basically, well, you can either open up, so there is particular types of super where you can invest in the stock market yourself. So the super account is basically, okay, 50% of it has to go into this fixed super fund, but then the other 50% of it, you can actually pick and choose what shares you want. So you can potentially do that and then invest in these Islamic exchange traded funds on the Australian Stock Exchange, right? So that you at least balance it with your, you balance your portfolio that way. Otherwise, it's just about choosing the one that is less haram, essentially, right? Based on your own research and your own analysis. But, hopefully you would move out of that boat quite quickly, because after a few pay brackets, you would after a few pay cycles, hopefully your super will exceed a certain amount, and then you can change your bank to Islamic, and then you don't need to worry about all that headache. Yeah.
Questions, audience? We'll go below. Yeah.
You mentioned before, the importance of developing Islamic financial infrastructure in Australia. So for those of us who are looking to work in the field of finance potentially in the future, what sort of advice or maybe a path would you recommend to get to that level of contributing to the Islamic finance field? So like someone in uni or straight out of uni, what's the best way that we can develop the skills to potentially get to that level or get into that field?
Do you mean specifically for Islamic finance, or is it just contributing to the community in general, I guess?
Islamic finance, or just the field in general. What are your recommendations? Because a lot of it is, touchy, some of it's haram, you don't want to get into certain fields. So what can we sort of focus on? What fields or markets should we consider going into potentially?
Look, it's very interesting because, it depends on where you want to go with it, right? So you may have the opinion where you feel, you want to reach a management level in a bank because there are certain skills or etc. that you might need because your intention in the future is to contribute in Islamic finance at that particular level, right? If you want to do that, then it's definitely, you go to a Sheikh, you discuss that, your personal circumstances, right? Because that is it's very difficult to answer broadly, right? But generally, the interesting thing about Islamic finance, it's sort of like the schools where sometimes you don't necessarily need, if you're really passionate about the field, you don't necessarily need to work in a bank to be in the field. For example, at ICFA right now, you have board of directors that are not only financial people, they're like engineers and they do other things as well, because they provide different perspectives on Islamic finance. But saying that, I personally don't recommend, Islamic finance is a very difficult career option in Australia because it's so small, right? You cannot, you do Islamic finance sort of as a passion rather than a career. So it's funny though, if anyone asks me, should I finish uni and go straight into Islamic finance, I'll say, no, don't do that. Don't do that, because whatever organization you go to, generally you're going to be consumed in their way of thinking. You're going to be sort of programmed to think in a certain way, and then you're going to work 10 years in the Islamic finance industry. You're going to come out and no one else is going to, you don't really have any more career opportunities outside of Islamic finance, or it's very difficult for you to then make the move, right? So even if you're passionate about Islamic finance, pursue whatever field you're good at or you're interested in outside, and then think about making a contribution later. And the skills that you get outside doesn't necessarily need to be finance-specific skills. For example, I don't know, you can work in government as a, I don't know, in the department of what education, when your brother works, or whatever, right? So if you do that for 10 to 12 to 15 years, you reach at a senior manager level, there are management skills that you already have, and then learning the Islamic finance, that's just the easy bit, right? Then you can apply all these management skills to really run an efficient organization. And if you ever choose to step back outside Islamic finance, your skills are very employable. You're still very desirable, your skills, right? But if you go straight into Islamic finance, you're kind of just, you're pigeonholing yourself. And I've seen some career paths where they'll go Islamic finance, then they'll work in Islamic finance as, on a low-level role, and then they'll progress into other financial organizations where they can't find any job anywhere else, so they have to go back to a bank, right, or so forth. So from a career planning perspective, I wouldn't recommend it to go straight into Islamic finance, but go into whatever field and then have that exposure to Islamic finance as you're progressing in your career, right? Whether it's getting involved in certain organizations, volunteering your time and just finding a bit more about Islamic finance, if that's the path that you really want to head. And then after 10 years, if you really want to take the dive, then you have your money, you have your experience to then really drive changes, right? I'm working with someone at the moment, he studied a lot of Islamic finance, went around working for different organizations, and now he's actually starting to do something for the Ummah, right? Certain things through, and then he's able to use all these corporate skills that he had to contribute to that. Yeah, but don't go Islamic finance straight away.
Yeah. I will just read a question online. So do you have advice for students studying courses like law, medicine? I know all the brothers here doing STEM, like engineering, comp sci, whatever. So where you might be told to do procedures or work on certain things that might be against the Sharia.
Well, I don't know. It's a very broad question, but if you can avoid doing those things, then you avoid doing those things as much as you can. For example, my wife's an obstetrician, right? So one of the things she gets asked sometimes is to do abortions, right? She just goes, no, go to someone else, right? I don't know. So she refuse to do abortions, for example, right? I don't know. For example, when you work, it's not any doctors and lawyers. If you go in the corporate world, they'll say, oh, you want to come for drinks at the bar. What are you going to say?
Networking, right?
You just say, look, I can't go. I don't drink. Just come have an orange juice, man. You're like, I don't want to be there. So it's all these situations, whether you're like, they'll come up in your whatever field you are. There's going to be certain things that would come up in your life, right? And I think, yeah, sorry.
But should we do that though? Like, I know some guys are like, oh yeah, you just come, don't drink alcohol, just orange juice, water, just for networking. Like, oh no, you don't.
Yeah, look,
Is there too much free mixing there?
It's you don't want to be in that environment, right? We spoke about before where, look, Islam gives you this boundary. You can operate anywhere within this boundary. Like, you don't want to operate as close as you can from the border to the border where you're almost falling into haram, but you like to play around there. Like, brother, sister, come on, man, just play in the circle, like far away from that, right? And you don't want to. That's the general principle you apply into your working lives, where you have these borders. You want to just go closer to the middle. Don't go to these, subhanallah, these borders, right? Where you're going into grey area now. It's no longer. And same thing applies. If you can get out of those situations, get out of the situation. As much as possible.
Questions?
Yeah. Oh, did I say something wrong? There's so many hands up now. I don't know.
Sheikh, I want to ask about HECS.
Yeah.
Something so relevant to all those uni students. So, is this something that's permissible, and if so, like, is it something that we should try to pay off as soon as possible, or can we just let our salaries like do their thing? Like, what's your advice on that?
Yeah, it depends on your opinion on HECS. Look, it's interesting. I wrote I worked with Tanvir. Do you know Tanvir, this brother?
Right?
Yeah, so we wrote that submission to the government about HECS and all that stuff. So I'm not sure if you guys read it, but I can send that link as well.
I think
they can read it as well.
I think it was in the MSA community chat. Like,
Yeah. So we the detail, but look, basically it depends on your opinion on HECS. You know, I know that there's a statement from ANIC that said, look, you know, HECS is permissible, but it doesn't provide much detail. Normally, in organisations, when they issue fatwa, they'll say, here are the reasons why, here are the guidelines, etc. Right? But there wasn't much guidelines to that. But so hence, miskin, like poor students, you need to work out what are the guidelines yourself, right? But generally, as a general principle, yes. Look, HECS. If you're on the position where you feel HECS is not permissible, and it becomes, if you read that article, there's very interesting articles that debating about the permissibility of HECS. 20 years ago, if you went to a typical Sheikh at the mosque, you know, during my time, they'll just go, no, it's haram, right? But that was, it was a very difficult message to communicate because, like yourself, it's like, I'm at uni, what do I do, right? And the general advice was, look, yeah, it's haram, but you know, it's allowable based on need, right? And then I think that's where the ANIC fatwa and all these fatwa comes. Look, it's allowable based on need because if we don't have this system in place, then students are not going to get educated and so forth. So it's not based on Islamic finance transaction, it's based on this principle of need. This fatwa is made, right? When a fatwa is made from a principle of need, basically is you need to then try and avoid that need as much as possible, which means then you try and pay back earlier rather than later, right? But because you're academics, I'm going to give, there's academic argument to this. So some scholars argue, well, it's not actually a debt because if you pass away, it's no longer on your neck. It's kind of forgiven, right? And then another complication comes when you speak about indexation. Is indexation interest or not? That's another debate, right? Is indexation an interest amount or not? Do we say, no, the increase that you're getting on your HECS, it's not interest, it's based on this inflation index, which some Islamic organization, Islamic councils have allowed a floating sort of interest, a floating rate, right? But then other organizations, Islamic scholars, they'll say, no, any change to debt, it doesn't matter how much or little, that becomes haram. So there's also debate around indexation, is that actually debt or not? So there's a lot of complications around the HECS issue. But the long and short of it is, look, if you have HECS, just try and pay it off as possible, but don't let it deter your studies. Study, use it, but when the opportunity comes, pay it off as quick as possible. And also, we're speaking about shields on the Day of Judgment. You have all these, there's many shields actually in front of you. There's international shariah organizations, your local ANIC, right? So you have all these shields, so you don't need to worry at your level. You just need to worry about, okay, if you're not comfortable with it, then you just pay it off.
Can we use you as a shield as well?
You can't use it. Hey, that's why I'm quoting. That's why I'm quoting fatwa and other people. So I don't get used as a shield.
Okay. Next question. Yeah.
Back to trading and stocks. A lot of students here are from probably not from finance background. Is it possible to show a balance sheet on the screen and go through it and see what exactly to look for?
I can. It will take some. Yeah. You know what? You should jump into an accounting lecture when they're doing it. It's exactly the same thing, but what I can do.
Like we can pick one from ASX or Nasdaq, one stock.
I can. Do we have time for that, or depends?
I reckon we'll just delay
Oh,
this video.
okay.
Yeah, I reckon.
I'll put it.
Too
I'll
much.
yeah.
But you can send
I'll
me,
just maybe I can screenshot and I can just
video.
circle. It's yeah.
I think like it's really important to know like what exactly to look for, because I've heard similar theories where they say those ratios and stuff, but like whenever I look at the balance sheet, so a lot of the things I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. There should be. I think there should be YouTube things as well, like on it. But I'll have a look.
Do you have any video on that or yourself?
No, I don't have any videos, but I'm sure there's other videos online that do that. But I'll have a
You can
look.
send it to me and I can send inshallah, yeah.
Just remind me. Yeah.
Yeah, of course I'll remind you.
Or if he doesn't, then you remind him. Yeah. So whatever. Look, he's not writing notes, so I forgot to write notes too. So whatever I said, I'll give you. Please remind Hasib, and then I'll
Just don't
yeah.
forget this one.
Yeah. No, I won't. Okay. Question over here.
I have two questions. One is, you know how we were talking about like credit cards, and then how like even though there's a condition on whether on you paying it off earlier, you're still signing off on a contract that kind of includes a clause of interest. Right?
Yes.
So does that mean that on any contractual agreements, if you have an agreement where it's like, if you do this, then you don't have to do this part that's haram. But since you signed off on a contract that has an inclusive area of haram, then that entire contract becomes haram. Is that kind of how it works, or is it like if you like stay within the bounds of deen, it doesn't matter whether the clause is in the contract or not?
Okay.
It's still
Okay. Let me try to rephrase it. Let me see if I'm understanding the question properly. So you're saying, look, if there is a contract, let's say the credit card contract, and there's a clause that says it's haram. No, wait. There's an interest rate clause.
Yeah.
Does that invalidate the entire contract? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Essentially, what I'm saying is that, like, let's say you have a credit card contract, and it says that if you pay your thing back within 30 days or 60 days, whatever,
Okay.
then you don't have to pay the interest.
Yep.
But you signed off on a contract that says that if you pass that 60-day mark, then you do have to pay the interest.
Yes.
Does that make the entire contract like an invalid haram contract?
Yes. So it's a really interesting question, right? So on a general, so some people, it's interesting because some people would use that particular example, and they'll say, look, as long as you don't pay interest ever, then it makes that contract halal, because there's a particular madhab that says that if a certain condition in a contract is haram, it doesn't necessarily invalidate the entire contract. And then the other madhabs, they say, look, no, if there's a condition of haram in the contract, it invalidates the entire contract, right? However, that is relating more to, this is an actual haram transaction that you're signing. So this contract itself, it's a contract of, it doesn't matter if, whether it's how many days or not, you're agreeing to paying interest on this particular contract, right? But yeah, some madhabs, they'll say if there's a particular clause of a contract, then that particular clause is struck out of the contract. However, we live in Australia, so you can't go to the courts and say, no, judge, but according to this madhab, this contract is legal. What's going to happen? What's going to happen in Australian courts? They're going to say, no, you sign the contract. This contract is applied like this in Australia, right? So yes, that's the context of Islam that it's a good question, but then if you actually go to the courts, it's a good question, right? So yeah, Islamically, if you went to an Islamic court of that particular madhab, right, in a certain Islamic state, just say there was a utopian Islamic state and they applied Islamic law as per the transactions, and if you had any problems with a contract, you'll go to the Islamic judge. The Islamic judge will go, this contract's still valid, I'm going to strike this out, that's not applicable. But we don't live there. We live in Australia where whatever contract you sign, you cannot use Dalil and Quran and Sunnah to prove that, it should be applied or not.
And the second thing that I had to say was, in today's corporate world, right, you find that as you kind of rise positions and ranks and stuff, you're given more responsibility and like a kind of role in which you're signing off on transactions and stuff. and because today's corporate world works so largely on kind of the basis of riba and like on interest, you have like a ton of areas in which like if you're like asked to sign off on something, even if you say no, the next person will sign off on it. And so when you hold a position, a role like that, in an area like that, you're kind of almost placed in a place where it's like things. So does that mean that in terms of being promoted and things like you're like in areas in which you're being promoted to, you have to kind of avoid responsibility in terms of those things?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, right? And there is no sort of direct answer for that, right? Because I think every one of you, as you progress, maybe some of you will progress in roles that have no financial responsibility at all. That's fine, right? But then perhaps some of you may progress into roles that have a lot of financial responsibility, where you need to sign off on bank contracts that require you to pay interest, right? And it comes down to, see, that's when you need the community, you need to speak to the Sheikh to see whether it's worthwhile for you staying in that role or not. Because I believe that those kind of questions, they're not direct yes or no answers. It depends on the context and on the person and just, at that particular time, their benefit to society and so forth. But personally, for example, I've turned down a job. I stepped away from a job. I turned down to progress in an interview for a particular job in an Islamic school, right? That's financed on bank contracts. Because Islamic schools are financed on the bank, on riba contracts. Because exact same reason, I'll go, well, if I'm going to go into that role, I would need to then ensure that interest payments are made. I need to sign interest contracts. I'm personally not comfortable with that, right? So I didn't do it, but then someone else got the job, which is, I'll leave it for them, right? But so it comes down to your own personal satisfaction with the role, and also it comes down to, if you really want that advice at that particular point in time, speak to the Sheikh, speak to those with knowledge, and just ask them to clarify. So you're building, I hate to say it, but you're kind of building these shields, But at the same time, you want to feel spiritually comfortable with what you're doing yourself as well.
Like I think, like in terms of let's say someone's running a company, there is let's say you find your way up to a CEO role as like a hypothetical. You know that this company has all these different elements, and you have knowledge of each of those things happening.
Correct.
You may not necessarily be signing off on them, but you're still kind of in the knowledge of it.
Yeah, and that's the challenges of going into corporate world. That's why, you could progress after a year or two in the corporate world. You go, oh, forget it, I'm just going to start my own business, right? Then you can make everything halal. But if you're going to progress that ladder, then you're going to have more and more responsibilities, and perhaps some of those responsibilities will be haram, or not Islamic, in the Islamic spirit. So then you need to decide yourself then, well, is that the path for me, right? And it's important to have that Islamic backing, never just to go do it, yourself, because that's very dangerous. It's also a slippery slope as well. You have brothers that don't have the community, don't have that sort of religious support. They'll go through, they'll work, and then I'll get a call, they're 20 years in the workforce, oh brother, I'm woke now, that's all haram. And they call me in distraught, I've been doing this for the past 20 years, right? But they've been so away and detached from the community for the past 20 years, they're not given this, they finally came to that realization themselves, right? So that's why Prophet ﷺ says, alaykum bi jama'ah, it's important upon you is this community, because they would advise you and support you and have your back each step of the way. Yeah, that's a good question there.
Yeah, so I have a question on riba, because it's the biggest concept in terms of differentiating Islamic finance and normal finance. So what exactly constitutes riba? I know it's a simple question, but I wanted to understand what constitutes a riba transaction, what doesn't constitute riba transaction.
Yeah, look, I think in modern day, in our modern day understanding, it's you don't need to sort of make a make it complex, right? It's just basically when you're trading money, when there's a money for money transaction, right? And you are receiving more in return, that's generally riba. I'm giving it's a whole chapter on it, because it's funny. when you read the chapters of fiqh, of Islamic legal law, you start off with a hadith, gold for gold, silver for silver, and you're like, man, I don't even deal in gold. Like you, so I'm not going to tell you all hadith and all this classical stuff. Essentially, the modern day gold for you is cash, right? Is money, and when you deal with money, you need to make sure that it's the same amount for the same amount. That's essentially it, right? So it comes down to, in our modern day dealings, same amount for the same amount of money, right? It becomes riba, for example, if you're signing that. The reason why is because when you're signing the contract with a bank, they're going to give you money and you're going to give them more in return, right? To make it Islamic, if Hasib gives me $1, I should give him $1 back, right? But if I sign a contract with Hasib to say he gives me $1, I give him $1.50, then that's an increase on that debt, right? From an Islamic point of view, debt financing is a contract of charity, of benevolence. It's never been a contract of profit making, like how it's done today.
So that's what I would ask. So you can't make profit from, because one can differentiate and say that I can lend money to someone as charity, but I could also be a wealthy person and my business is to lend money, but then get it will be stipulated at the contract that you'll pay me back more. But my intention from the beginning was not charity. My intention is to make it as a business. So is it that the concept itself of making money off of lending people is haram? Is that why? Yeah,
that's right. The concept itself, it's on the basis, a debt in Islam is a benevolent charitable contract. You shouldn't make money from that transaction. And when you make money or when you start receiving benefits from the debt, that becomes haram. So for example, scholars even go to the extent of where receiving non-financial benefits. So if I write in the contract, we want to be smart and we go, I'm going to lend you $100. You're going to give me $100 back and you're going to give me use of your car as well. Like to them, they'll say, no, that's also interest because you're getting some benefit as a result of that debt. Yeah, you're getting $100 back, but you're getting additional benefit from that debt, right? And so basically, they'll cut out any sort of benefit, and that's why some scholars, they're even scared to if they're borrowing money from someone, right? They want to just avoid them at all costs because they don't want any additional benefit from the debt, right? To the extent of some classical scholars, but it's about not making money from the debt. Islamic finance is different, where it's partaking in trade, right? So they're sort of saying, instead of me giving you money to say you want to build you want to make a farm, for example, I'll just go, okay, I'll invest in the farm, you work on that farm, and we will share the profits from the farm, right? There's risk involved in that, right? I'm putting an asset on the table, I'm risking the asset, and I'm getting a return from the asset.
So I know
I
that.
can say when I'm lending the money, I'm also risking as well.
Yeah,
Exactly. No, that's beautiful point, right? Yes, you are risking the money, but the Sharia says when you lend that money, this particular currency, that comes under the chapter of a debt, and when you actually receive more benefits from that money, that becomes under the chapter of riba, right? So I'm just giving. But then if you say, okay, well, that land is an asset and I'm putting that risk on the table, but the land is not classified as an asset that attracts riba. You know what I mean? But the cash is a riba asset. It's a riba asset class. So if you want to think of that, have you got a finance background? So you know what I know?
No, I don't have that.
Okay. No, but it's like an asset class, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, gold, you have to give gold, you have to get back the same in return. Silver, same. Certain commodity products, same. What you give, what you get. And the scholars, based on that, back in the Prophet ﷺ, they didn't have the Australian dollar, but they said, based on this currency, it's similar to gold. So this is a category of this riba asset. If you give it, you have to get the same return. Now, we go to a chair or a car or a house. These are types of assets that are not similar to this hadith about riba on these asset riba classes. Therefore, you may give that and get, so I may give you a land of 100 square meters and you may give me 10,000 square meters, and it doesn't matter because it's not a riba, an interest-based asset, as per the definition of the shariah.
Okay. What
Yeah,
if someone gives you something really cheap and says, okay, I'll lend you a suite for $1 million, and then hiding under the fact that the asset itself, the suite, is not, like, you're giving something, but then you'll pay me back at a later time, the same suite, but at a higher price.
I reckon let's get to the framework of like what a halal transaction is. Like, you know the yardstick that you said, you know the yardstick where there's like 5 or 4 principles, was it, to a halal transaction? Like,
I can't remember. I speak about this topic so much.
Yeah, yeah.
No, but look, here's a question. So
like,
it depends what you're doing with that transaction. So if I'm selling you a suite, right? So if the contract says I'm selling you this suite for $1 million, but you have to buy it back from me for $1.5 million, then the scholars will look at that and go, yeah, yes, it's being smart. This is a riba transaction. Halas. They'll just do that, essentially, right? So you're using that as a excuse, and there's that's called bay al-aina. There's an actual Islamic term for that. Yeah. So it's been discussed in the past and that's interesting, right? So sometimes when you don't read the Islamic books, right, you would think that a lot of these concepts sometimes in our society are new, but when you actually delve deeper into them, like some of the detail, like it's amazing, right? Like even when we're talking about, right, and this is a very controversial topic, and I'm going to tell you the detail. Like scholars talk about, for example, the feelings men have towards other men, how to deal with that, how to address that, blah, 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 right? What if someone is born with actual, and I read this with interest, because my wife's medical field, not because I'm crazy, right? But, like if they're born with certain parts that are mixed, right? The scholars discuss that in like precise detail, how to deal with that. Are they acting more like male or female? It gets really deep, right? And it's not a modern discussion. It's like discussions that happen centuries and thousands of 1,000 whatever years ago, right? When Islamic law was being codified, like these issues were discussed in detail. And when you actually read it, it's quite eye-opening. You think, subhanAllah, it's quite amazing the way that the scholars thought. For example, there's an opinion that used to say, I'm waffling a bit, but it might be interesting for everyone. There's even, for example, scholars, they used to differ on how long a baby should be in the womb. Right? Scholars say, no, the maximum term is 20 months. Some scholars say, no, Islamic scholars, right? Some scholars say, no, the maximum term is 4 years, 5 years, right? But then if you speak, with modern day science and stuff, like no one's going to tell you like the baby is in the womb for 4 or 5 years.
Isn't it 9 months?
Yeah, 9 months, 10 months, right? Look, so that's what I'm saying. But Islamic scholars in the past have said, well, look, they have these discussions that, oh no, it's up to 2, 5 years and whatever, right? But all these, and they discuss it in so much detail and things like that. It's all in the books and it's all very interesting. You just got to learn Arabic and start flipping the pages. It's very interesting. Sorry.
Yeah. In terms of like, okay, so I'm just warding off the discussion a bit. So in terms of like learning Arabic, right, deen studies, a lot of the brothers, obviously in the MSA, I know that brothers want to study deen even more, right?
Yeah.
So how do we do that? How do we balance that between our career and with our and like inshallah start a family, but also like studying deen as well? So is there a sort of advice that you can give us as well for studying deen, or do we have to study deen?
Yes. So all the, I know like we always speak about, look, we want to change the ummah, but you can't do that in the masjid. But the deen, the reason why I say it is because studying the deen and learning your Islam, that's like the basic benchmark that forms your principles for life. And if these pillars are weak, like you'll have a lot of troubles spiritually as you progress in life, how you see things and measure things, right? So this study of the religion at its basic level is highly encouraged, and everyone should do that. Now, how you do that is through, I was speaking to the brother before, right? Like you have to do it young, we start young and do it consistently as well. For example, right? I wanted to study the shariah. I was in Australia, but I wanted a good Arabic program to study the shariah, right? I couldn't just travel myself overseas at that particular time, you know, because I needed to support my family and so forth. So I took an online degree where I was studying consistently for 10 years, and I complemented that with mashayikh also online as well, because you know, it's easy to access high caliber mashayikh online, right? But if I was to tell you that I was trying to do that in 2 years, you'll never get it done. You know, it's too hard, right? But if you have a plan and you have consistency, and more in particular for university students, like if you enroll in certain programs when you finish university, Islamic studies programs, and keep with it and slowly do it, that's how you're able to complement your Islamic studies with your life, right? But never think about, it will be very difficult for you to devote 4 or 5 years of your life overseas or studying Islam. Rather, you continue on with your life, but then you study the Islam along the way, right? Have it like, you know, we called it like, you have this compounded growth in finance, but you also have this compounded growth in your intellectual knowledge as well, right? So the more you study over time, the more it's reinforced. And then after 5, 10 years, yeah, you'll be knowledgeable in whatever field that you have, and also knowledgeable in the Islamic sciences. And also, by combining your secular knowledge and your Islamic knowledge, you actually become a real asset for the community in your chosen field, right? Any field, whatever it is. You might have an interest in inheritance. You might have an interest in politics, right? So whatever you're interested in, the Islamic perspective is always there, but you need to slowly build yourself up, and it's done over time. It's really difficult to conduct your life and smash it out, and yeah.
We'll go online questions.
Just a quick question.
Online
Okay.
questions.
I just want to ask,
Oh, yeah, it's good.
where did you study Islam?
Okay, so my formal Islamic studies is the Islamic University in Malaysia, right? So I did my shariah there by correspondence, and then I did my master's there by correspondence as well, because I felt that it suited my lifestyle. So it had 2 branches. Like some people actually went in person to study, but that's why. And then I studied with mashayikh online as well. So I had access to mashayikh overseas and so forth. And when you obtain a certain level of competency, then you, like at university, you start reading research papers and so forth, and you can directly, you know, like your classic academic journals, right? The author's there, and then you can contact the author directly to ask them about their journal and have really rich discussions on that as well. So it's a typical academic environment, because I found that that's what suited me. If I went to study with a sheikh in private circles, which I've also done, it's hard to become consistent, because you're inconsistent, the sheikh's inconsistent, and then you end up not finishing the book. Sometimes you do, alhamdulillah, but I find that the university style for me, or maybe for you as well, you're just so used to that structure, and then you just follow that through.
Is it fine if I ask you for like details after this?
What about the degrees and stuff? Yeah, certainly, yeah, of course, yeah.
All right, online questions are, all right, so we've got 2 or 3. That's fine.
Sorry?
It's 2 or 3 online questions.
Yep.
One of it's so obviously everyone wants to buy a house, right? No one wants to buy.
I think we're almost done.
Yeah.
I think we're almost done. Okay.
So
okay.
One of the
Last 2 questions.
Yeah.
Khalas, yeah.
Okay. So what Islamic loan providers would you recommend?
Look, obviously, I recommend, the organization. Look, I was of the same boat, right? I went to work for Islamic organization, finance organization, because I really wanted to sort of look under the hood, all right? And I really feel that ICFAL from a financing perspective is the best, right? Basically because I find that the structure is the best. Otherwise, there are other ones out there if they're desperate to have other fatwa mashayikh that approve, right? And I go back to what I said at the beginning, where it's not haram upon you, it's not haram for you to follow a sheikh's opinion. It's, it's haram for someone to tell you it's haram to follow a sheikh's opinion, but it's not haram for you to follow a sheikh's opinion, right? You're entitled as a Muslim in the community to ask a sheikh and follow a sheikh's opinion. Because like I said at the beginning, even if you study 10 years, you're working in the field, like it's still difficult to grasp.
Yeah.
Last one.
All right, last one. Okay, so when we talk about being rich, does that correlate with living in extravagance? Sometimes hearing about the story of Prophet ﷺ, I see a lot of examples where he avoided spending money on himself to live an extravagant lifestyle.
So yeah, so
So when we talk about being rich, does that correlate with living extravagance?
extravagance is different to being wealthy, because you can be wealthy and not live in extravagance.
And that's what we strive to do, right? Or
Yeah, I mean, look, sometimes you can work so hard, but you still won't be rich, you know? So if you happen to be wealthy, then it's important not to live extravagantly, right?
Yeah.
And that's where the hadith could also apply. Live in this world, you can be very wealthy, but you can still live in this world as if you're a traveler.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I think that should wrap up the discussion. We've been going on for like 2
Alhamdulillah
hours
Rabbil
30.
Alameen. Okay.
Alhamdulillah. So inshallah, we're going to have some mansaf in the masala. So sisters, you guys go and go to the masala to see some masala. And brothers, we have to go brothers masala, obviously, get some mansaf. Yeah, has anyone had any final, do you have any final advice that you can give us?
Look, I think final advice is look, it's not always black and white, right? How we live in a society where it's grey, understanding shariah is grey, be accepting of other opinions and other differing opinions. I think that's really important. As you gain more knowledge, you'll look at the world in a different way, and you realise that there's a lot more opinions than you originally think you have, and always sort of take everything in context. But that's pretty much it, right? And be flexible.
So be open.
Yeah, be open. I think that being open is really important. Yeah.
Just got
Alhamdulillah
everyone.
Rabbil
So we'll just
Alameen.
wrap it up there, inshallah. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. I don't know the door. So you just say the door, but inshallah we'll just start heading, eat, and then we'll just go pray, inshallah.
Yeah, where's the musalla?
Inshallah, I'll show you.
Okay. Can I just get a quick photo of the brothers?
Yeah.
Because you know what? I need to get a photo of my brothers because my work's going to ask me, where have you been? You know?
Okay.
So I'll just take, yeah.
Yeah, sure. Is this for Iqbal?
Yeah.
You want me to take a photo?